It's been a while since I posted a full-length video, so I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, thank you so much for 100,000 subscribers. I made a YouTube short about this a while ago, but I wanted to make sure I acknowledged it in a full-length video as well. So just thank you so much. And also, if you're waiting for the plans for the 20-drawer parts organizer from a single 2x6, it took me 3 months because I kept putting it off, but I finally have those done and they're on my website for free. So yeah, in this video, I'm be making a step ladder from a bunch of 2x4s, and it does not go exactly as planned. So if you want to see what's wrong with this project, I'll talk about that at the end of the video. I just bought a bunch of 2x4s, and some of them have this weird sort of gray color to them, and I don't know what that's from, but it looks really interesting, and I wanted to use them in a project. So in this video, I'm going to be making a step ladder for the shop, which is something I've needed for a while, and I'm going to use some of these 2x4s to do that. So the design that I went with for this step ladder is kind of like half step ladder, half chair. So it has really wide steps and has a back rest like a chair would have. And right now I'm making the backrest, which I wanted it to be a little bit wider than a 2x4. So I resawed the 2x4, and then I'm going to book match that back together to make a wider piece to make the backrest of the step ladder. Also, if you're wondering why that knot in the middle looks so weird, that's because the knot actually fell out, so I refilled it in with some black 3D printing filament and a 3D printing pen. So, not the original knot. So this backrest piece is actually going to bend around and transition into the two armrests on either side of the step ladder. And so to do that, I'm going to do some kerf bending with wedges. And so I have the depth of my miter saw set to just shy of all the way through this board so that I can easily bend it. And then I'm going to fill in those kerfs that I just cut with some wedges. So I'm going to use one of the offcuts from earlier to make all the wedges for making this kerf bending with wedges work. And so I'm going to cut one really long angled strip from this offcut, and then I'm going to cross cut that angled strip into a bunch of smaller wedges that I can use to bend that backrest. And before doing any bending, I usually will spray down the joint with some water, and that just loosens everything up a little bit and keeps it from cracking when I'm driving in all these wedges. And as usual, every time I do kerf bending with wedges, it's always a nightmare. It looks pretty easy right now because it's so sped up, but I cut the wedges too big, so I was just wrestling with it for like 20 minutes. But it's good practice, I guess. Hopefully one day it won't be so difficult. Now I gotta reshape the two sides of this backrest into the armrest shape that I want for this step ladder. And that just involves a bunch of cutting and re-gluing and stuff like that. And it's kind of easier to see than explain. Backrest looks pretty decent, so now I can move on to making the front legs of the step ladder. So I'm going to cut off a section of the 2x4, and then I'm going to cut that up at the table saw to make the legs and the supports for the legs. And those leg supports that I talked about earlier are just going to be some 3/4 inch dowel that I need to make. So I have a 3/8 inch round over bit, and I'm just going to round over all sides of this stock to make dowels. And now I'm going to cut out 4 dowels that I can use throughout the project. And as for the legs, I'm going to cut those to size as well. I was about to put all these pieces together, and then I was looking at these dowels, and there's these lines left on the dowels from where the roundover cuts overlapped. So I put a screw in my drill, and I'm going to use that to attach the dowels to my drill so I can sand off all those lines. I drilled a couple of holes in each of the legs to hold the dowels in place. And once I sanded them, the dowels aren't really 3/4 of an inch anymore. I think I ended up using a 11/16 inch spade. But anyways, I put the dowels into place, and then those dowels connect the two legs, and then the legs connect to the backrest. Oh, also, you can't really see it, but I'm using CA glue, just CA glue, to connect the backrest to the legs. And that's just because I just needed to tack it in place. I'm about to do a more permanent connection. So I'm using my biscuit joiner to cut a bunch of slots that I can spline this joint together with. And then I used my hole saw bit, you can see in the corner, to cut a bunch of metal splines to fit into these slots. And I have bi-metal hole saw bits, so I can cut wood or metal with them. So that worked pretty well, and then I'm just using some metal infused epoxy to glue these in place. And then once the glue dried, I just sanded everything flat with my belt sander. I'm going to make the back legs in just a minute here, but these back legs are going to need to hinge because I want this whole step ladder to be able to fold up. So I need to make that sort of hinge shape now. And like I did with making the metal splines earlier, I'm going to use my hole saw bit to make these hinge pieces as well, because I want them to be able to fit within a biscuit slot. So same way that I did with the metal splines, I'm just going to cut a slot with my biscuit joiner and then glue in my piece with some more metal infused epoxy. With the hinge pieces all done, now I can finally make the back legs of the step ladder. So as usual, I'm starting off at the miter saw. I'm going to cut off a section of the 2x4, and then I'm going to rip that section of 2x4 into some 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch stock. And I'm going to take this stock and I'm going to turn it into some really wide, big 1.5 inch dowels. And I wish that I had a 3/4 inch roundover bit, but I don't. So I'm going to have to do this a different way. But to start, I'm going to chamfer all the edges to make these next steps a little bit easier. So earlier when I was making those 3/4 inch dowels, you saw I just used a small screw to chuck up the dowel into my drill. But for a dowel this size, that just won't work. It's too big and there's too much torque trying to turn it. It would just strip out the screw. So instead I'm using a hole saw bit, and then I'm going to drive in some screws perpendicular to the stock to hopefully hold it in place better so it doesn't strip out. And then I'm going to use this jig that I made to turn the stock into a dowel. Once I have the dowel shaped, there's a bunch of little steps that I have to do, like cutting the ends off at the right angle and drilling holes for hardware. And I really should have done those steps before shaping these into dowels, but now, to keep them from rolling around, I have these dowels glued down to a flat piece of wood. I'm also going to do some final shaping here at the disc sander and table saw just to make these legs look a little bit nicer. The back legs fit into place well, but there's nothing really keeping them in line, so I need to make a little connector piece for those two back legs. I'm using a hole saw bit to cut the ends of this connector piece so it fits nicely around the two round back legs. And I'm going to make the steps, or I guess they're pretty wide steps, so maybe seats. And so I'm cutting a bunch of sections of 2x4, and I'm going to resaw those at the table saw and then glue those up into panels to make the steps. And once the glue dries, I'm going to use my big belt sander to flatten out these panels. And then over at the table saw, I'm going to make a bunch of kerf cuts because I'm going to bend over the front edge of each of these seats because I want them to have a big bullnose front edge. Again, I'm going to spray this down with some water to loosen everything up. And then I'm going to tack this joint together just with some CA glue. This isn't going to be permanent. I'm just tacking it in place while I make these side pieces that are going to hold the shape more permanently. And that's what I'm making right now is the edges of these seats. And I'm going to cut the shape out at the bandsaw and then glue those on to each end of each seat. And to go along with all the other metal inlays that I've been putting into this project, I'm going to use some big nails to align this piece while the glue dries. I immediately decided that I did not like those big nail heads. They're just too much. So I sanded off the top of each nail head to reveal the 1/8 inch metal pin underneath, which I think looks a little nicer. And to finish off these steps, I'm just going to cut a couple more strips just to fill in the backside of each step. I decided that it'd look nicer if I added a small arc to the backside of each step. And I had an idea, again, going with this metal inlay theme, to use an old bandsaw blade that was all worn out and cut that into little splines that I could use to hammer in and connect the end piece to the rest of the seat. I really don't think that these bandsaw splines added much, if any, strength, and they didn't really turn out the way that I'd hoped either, but it's always fun to experiment. So last step before I put all this together and finish this project, I need to make some sort of hinging bracket sort of thing that can connect the top step to the bottom step and support the bottom step while still allowing the whole step ladder to fold up when I'm done with it. And to do that, I'm flattening out and bending this piece of conduit to the right bracket shape that I need. I finished the stepladder with some Walrus Oil brand furniture butter, and this isn't sponsored by them or anything. I just saw a lot of people on TikTok using it and thought I'd try it out, and it works pretty good. So now to what I don't like about this project. So this project looks pretty good from a distance. It's got the signature dents and gaps that are in all of my projects, but that's not really what I'm upset about. What I really don't like about this project is how it folds up. I really should have put some more thought in how that was going to work because it does not fold up flat at all. It sticks out a bunch, which is kind of annoying. So if you have any solutions for how I might fix that, please let me know in the comments. But in all reality, I'm probably just going to forget about this project in a week and move on to something else and learn to deal with it. But other than that, this was a fun project to experiment with. I don't really work with metal a lot, so it was fun to try some like different metal inlays. One thing I don't like about the metal inlays when you're sanding everything flat, the metal dust gets stuck in the pores of the wood, and you end up with these black smudge marks everywhere that I really couldn't get out. But other than that, it was a fun project to try out. Not perfect, but fun.